Hey, are you ready to grow your business? You have checked out the number one resource for business leaders, entrepreneurs, startup founders, and managers. And we're going to teach you how to grow and scale your business with real actionable steps. There's no fluff in this podcast. It's just good advice. Check out this episode. If you're a first-time listener, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. And if you enjoy this episode, leave us a 5-star review. Today's episode is with Kayvan Kian, who's a senior advisor with McKinsey Company. We're talking about resilience and overcoming challenges in, frankly, an uncertain world. Kayvan's an expert at this. In fact, he's an author of the best-selling book, What is Water? How Young Leaders Can Thrive in an Uncertain World. And we're going to be talking about that exact question today. You're going to enjoy this episode. We have a great conversation. Stay tuned. Here comes your good advice. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Good Advice Podcast. So excited for today's episode. We're going to be talking about, think about all those times in your life that you had to overcome something. What did you get out of those moments? What did you learn from those moments? And more importantly, when you think about leadership and how do you actually tangibly lead people, not just through hard times, but especially through maybe even crises on your team, how do you do that in a way that actually makes sense and gets you to the point that you want to get to? I'm not talking about stuff that you read about in a book. I'm talking about stuff that you actually know what to do and you know how to do it to actually overcome obstacles in our life. Today, we're sitting down with Kayvan Kian. He's the senior advisor at McKinsey Company. He's also the author of a book called What is Water? How Young Leaders Can Thrive in an Uncertain World. It's available on Amazon. You can check it out right now. Kayvan, it's great to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Blake. Thanks for the invitation and looking forward to our conversation.
Now, you are calling in from all the way over in Amsterdam.
Indeed.
All right, so you got to tell me, is there a food that anyone who goes to Amsterdam, they have to try this one food, one meal? What's Amsterdam known for?
So the good news is all the worldly dishes are served here. So you can have anything you like, maybe because Amsterdam is not particularly known for its cuisine. Though I would recommend the fries that we have at any hour of the day.
Okay. Do you have a personal favorite of a meal?
Of a meal? So
that would probably it probably sounded like a personal favorite of fries. And I guess fries are just fries, right? So.
Well, fries are fries for if you're not from here, maybe, but there are definitely some better ones. If you're ever around, I can show you.
Okay, cool. I love it. Well, it's great to have you on the show today. I'm so excited. It's always a real pleasure to have someone like yourself on the show today. Tell me and the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Kayvan, and many years ago, I noticed while I was working as a consultant that the leaders I was working with, particularly the young leaders, that they were not only struggling with the content of the work, but also in the how do you do the work? How do you stay sane in a crazy changing environment? And all of that was way before COVID, and it was already getting crazy, if you can remember. And I noticed there were so many struggles, so I started a program called the Young Leaders Forum. And we brought together young leaders from the private sector, public sector, social sector, and with a very basic question asking, how do you lead, grow, and thrive in a world that feels more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous? And we did this without any PowerPoint, which might sound strange from a consultant. We did this without tables in the room, very basic, just good conversations. And very personal, opening up stories and learning from each other. And that picked up here in Amsterdam, but also from the US to Australia to all the other continents. And what happened was that after a while, I realized all these things that I learned, all these things that our clients are learning, how can I make it more accessible for anyone? And that's where the idea for the book came out. So I'm not an author in the traditional sense. I haven't written all my life. But the book contains all the answers to many questions that young leaders are struggling with, but also with many exercises, stories, and things to learn from.
One of the things,
basically what I do. Yeah.
One of the things that's really valuable, though, you sort of joked that you haven't been an author your whole life, but I think what's great is that your book is coming directly out of, it's a byproduct of these really valuable conversations that you're having. Mm-hmm. Leadership's interesting. It feels like leadership feels like this thing where everyone sort of excitedly thinks about, like, yeah, like I want to be a leader, right? Mm-hmm. And then you actually step into those shoes and you realize this is really complicated. And it almost feels like today, I was reading about how there's more money than ever being invested in the leadership training space. And yet people are still leaving their bosses in droves for the bad experiences that they're having, especially during COVID, where I don't know what it's like in Amsterdam, but here in the States, we have a worker shortage of people who are essentially saying, I don't want to work in this job environment anymore. So it feels like it's this thing that's actually much more complicated in practice. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing young leaders today face?
So, indeed, the loss of talent, people leaving, especially I spoke with somebody last week, and this person shared that there were people leaving the company because they never got the chance to meet anyone in the company. So the sense of loyalty was very little, as you can imagine. So many people started working at an organization during COVID without ever meeting anybody in person. Now, I would say one step before that, before thinking about, how do I help my teams, which is, of course, of extreme importance, it starts with how do I stay sane myself? How do I make sure that I can cope with the sense of overwhelm? I can deal with the sense of uncertainty. How do I make sure that I don't want to quit this role that I maybe had over-glamorized somehow, some way, because of old stories or books or anything like that. And the Young Leaders Forum and also the book, therefore, starts with you, even before others. And it helps you become more aware of all the things that you can always do that matter, that help you thrive, that are always within your control, independent of what's going on out in the world. And once you master those ways of thinking, it's easy to become more aware of your team members and what could help them, and then go on to your organization, and then go to a community, and go to your broader society. And we build up the scope, so to speak, step by step. But it starts with you.
Does it feel like most people are not self-aware to who they are, and so maybe even their habits and their perspective on things?
So it's a very strange paradox, and because you could argue, you're with you the whole day, right? There hasn't been a moment where you haven't been able to be with yourself. But as the famous story that got popularized also by David Foster Wallace in his commencement speech, it's for fish very difficult to see water. Some things are too close, and you're maybe too close to you. So when it comes to questions around, what do you get energy from, what drains you, what gives you a sense of purpose, what not, what are you good at, what not, what gives you a positive kick, how do you make sure you protect the positivity, and so forth. In practice, these were very difficult questions to answer for many participants, many clients I worked with. And the big benefit was putting people together to have these conversations. So the questions are not very complicated, but you need to come up with them first. And you need probably someone to talk to, or have a notebook, like in the book, which has a lot of room for exercises to go through these. So to your point, it's not easy, and it's okay. You're not the only one if you're not completely aware of yourself in all these aspects.
I think what's interesting is that, as you pointed out, these questions aren't very complicated. I mean, you're not being, put in front of a chalkboard with like some incredible theorem that you have to, someone hands you the chalk and now prove this. It's something as simple as what gives you energy or what drains you. But even that, is something that many people really struggle to articulate. And maybe they sense it. Maybe they've had fleeting experiences with, okay, I remember a time that I was exhausted. They haven't quite put their finger on it. Harvard Business Review put out a study a few years ago that talked about how when we look at the number of people who are actually self-aware, they put it as low as 10% of people in terms of how they view themselves and who they actually are, those two people actually lining up and being accurate. What do you think the reason is for such a low percentage of people actually being self-aware and knowing who they are? You know, some of these questions, knowing what drains them, knowing what they're gifted at. Any ideas?
Yeah, I think on a more fundamental level, it could be a philosophical reason, because you could go very deep into who are you and what does it mean to be fully self-aware and or enlightened. So I'll leave that for another moment to have that.
That'll be the next podcast.
Of course, and that's very interesting, of course, to discuss. But on a more practical level, it is often we learn things we focus on. And if you don't get the honest feedback from your environment, if you haven't been raised in an environment where these questions were asked, if you didn't go to a school where people would focus on who you are, but much more on what you should perform, what you should be able to do. So you go through school and your first job and all of that, thinking, what's the new checklist I need to, accommodate to. And these checklists are there for a reason. The people who are able to perform these tasks, succeed in this company and help our clients and so forth. But it's continuously trying to adjust who you are to, the new checklist, which can, of course, you can imagine, be very tiring after a while, because the question is, okay, but who am I and what do I want to do and what do I have to bring? And in the book, in the Young Leaders Forum, we turn it completely around. We don't say, what are the checklists that others, and what are the expectations of others? That's a good question. But we say, what do you bring? And maybe you're very entrepreneurial, but you work at an organization where nobody asks you to initiate anything. Maybe you're very resourceful, but again, nobody asks you that question. You're good at resolving conflicts. Maybe you're good at setting a vision. Maybe you're good at mediating. You're a creative problem solver. You're good at analyzing, all these things. And then we ask, okay, but of all these things you're good at, which ones give you energy? Which ones drain you? I'm surprised how often people say, nobody's ever asked me that. The assumption here is just because I'm good at something, I should enjoy it. I should like it, but actually, no, I'm good at resolving conflict, but once a week is fine, but once a day is just too much. I'm completely depleted, but the other way around, as well.
If I can ask more about that, it seems like many people who come on the podcast, they are business owners, they're leaders in their own right. And I've noticed a common trend of guests on the podcast who have started their own business. Many of them were formerly in the corporate world. And one of the reasons that they left was exactly the phrasing you're using, that, well, no one was really taking advantage of this passion or skill set that I really felt like I had. It seems like this is a common trend in large businesses where you have talent, but recognizing the individual gifts of that talent is often missed. And some of these things, they don't necessarily fit well on a resume. I'm good at resolving conflict. They don't necessarily put that on a resume. And so what's going on in the corporate world? How can we be, for those who are listening, for example, who are managers in a corporate environment, how can we access the talent of our people better and engage them better?
That's a very good question, because just relying on the way things are being done doesn't result in getting those talents out, because someone or some people, at least centrally, have to think, what's the policy for the average employee? What's the policy of how we do things in general? You could consider that a little bit like a minimum standard. And if you work in a certain organization where there's a lot of analytics that needs to be done, of course, there's a minimum bar that you need to perform at. Otherwise, it might not be a good fit in the first place. But as a manager, then you can say, okay, if this is the minimum standard, let's look beyond that. What is this person bringing in? What were the qualities this person had when they started interviewing here? Did they indeed have their own company before they joined? Are they someone who are able to see solutions that others don't beyond the day-to-day scope of their work? Do they have a fantastic sense of humor that can break the ice with the most difficult clients that we have in a way that doesn't come across as unprofessional? And having a very simple conversation with an individual, it starts also with yourself on a board that says, let's think about these topics. And as a manager, you can set the tone here, because you can say there are certain things in life I'm good at, but there are also certain things I'm not so good at. And that's fine. There's certain things that give me energy. There's certain things that drain my energy, and that's fine. And by sharing some examples from your side, saying, I'm really good at planning, but I'll be honest, this is not the reason I signed up for this job, but I'm still going to do what's required. What about you? What are certain things that you need to do, but maybe are not the most exciting part of the work? And how do you make sure you don't get drained? In the book, it's about small things that make a big difference. So it's not about changing the whole organization, because most people who read this or joining this podcast are not in a position to do that or even want to do that. Right. How do you make that difference within your team, within your management, with your programmers, within the lab, wherever you work?
It seems like the teams that do this well, they foster an environment of trust and vulnerability. I know I live on in a college town. The college campus is literally just right up the road. And I work with some of the young entrepreneurs who are, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, thinking about the future. And it seems like this conversation of what am I passionate about? What am I good at? What do I not feel? I don't know if anyone would necessarily say I'm not good at blank out of fear for how that might be perceived. Like I'm not the right person for the job. But I have seen in many companies where that environment of trust is really nurtured, where someone can openly say, not only I don't feel very passionate about this, I also don't think I'm very good at it. And they're not talking about like their job, right? They're talking about like one element of their job that isn't necessarily the job description. How can leaders foster that culture of trust and vulnerability where you can collaborate and have conversations with your team members to essentially put them in the right positions?
Very good. Yeah, because this is not about judging people or evaluating them. This is in many ways about how do you bring out the best out of your team? How do you make sure you can run this marathon using these unconventional skills that you bring? And two things that immediately come to mind. One is, as I shared a little bit just now, is being the role model. So, if you don't share these things about you, if you don't ask for help or advice or anything around that, you cannot maybe necessarily expect others to open up that easily. And I've worked with people myself directly, and it works very nicely when people start with themselves and say, look, this is a little bit the conversation I would like to have, but let me share from my side. And second of all, it's not an academic exercise as in, let's create this exhaustive list of the 100 skills and map them. And some things are maybe private. Some people don't want to share certain things or not. That's completely fine. One thing that I typically do is say, let's share one thing. What's one skill you're not good at, but energizes you, that after we've finished working on this project, you want to make progress on, and let's talk about that. And someone says, I would love to get better at negotiating because, I see this in the movies and I see this everywhere and I think it's really exciting. Nobody's ever taught me this. It's not business critical, but it's definitely exciting. And they say, okay, let's start there. And who knows, along the way, you have a second or a third skill. But you can make it fun, you can make it exciting, you leave the choice to the team, and you build that trust, step by step.
I love that. And I love the idea of having that open conversation with your team members, and that isn't necessarily public. I remember I was in a meeting one time where it essentially was everyone else on my team was, let's talk about what Blake is really good at and what he's not so good at. And I wasn't expecting it. And I remember thinking like, this was a bit awkward for me because I didn't necessarily think we were doing this. But the other insight that you said that I think is really valuable is I think that many people who are listening, who are leaders, they have the perception that they have to communicate that they have it all together. And so this concept of actually role modeling it and saying, hey, this is something that, to your team, I'm not very good at whatever it is. And maybe I even need your help in doing it better. That sort of transparency and vulnerability, it seems like goes a really long way to creating that culture on your teams versus the leader who tries to present themselves as I got it all together, or worse, we're going to talk about your challenges, but we're never gonna talk about me. I'm the boss. So, which I think people are sort of in a cliche, they're sort of used to.
It's a very good point that you bring, and fundamentally, you could say it's even in your own interest because nobody believes there is a perfect person. So everybody knows if you say we got it all together, that's just not true. There's no basis in reality. It just means you don't want to talk about any of these things, probably. And why not? Unless you feel that you are exactly where you want to be for the rest of your life, why not find something that you get energy from, but you're not good at yet? And you're doing this project anyway. You might as well develop new skills for your next step.
Something that we've mentioned it a little bit, but we haven't really dug too deeply in it, is this concept of essentially resiliency. What allows someone to overcome challenges, overcome circumstances. I think all of us in our lives, we can point to different moments that we would say that was a really hard moment in my life. And some people, frankly, have much more challenging circumstances than others. Talk to me a little bit about, and I know this is part of the premise of the book, a little bit more about this concept of resiliency and being able to overcome hard situations.
So, as we all noticed last year, if nobody had noticed this before, that hard times are part of life. It's inevitable, privately, professionally, collectively. And the question is, how do you prepare maybe in the good times? So when the challenging ones arrive, that you feel prepared. You can not only lead yourself, but also your teams, your organization, your community, and others. And I hope that the reader, after finishing the book, sees that resilience is a very broad word, abstract word, just again, like meaning, like strengths and all of these things. It's not a button you push and say, I'm a resilient person now. It is the result of a variety of ways of thinking and doing that help you thrive through challenging times. And what I mean by that is, in the book, having a very simple premise of, okay, what matters? What are the things that help me thrive right now and my teams? And the second question always is, what's within my control? And learning to think in that way already gives you a sense of empowerment in a world that feels out of control. You realize that you can lose 24 hours per day focusing on all the things you wish you could do but can't. But who's going to be helped by that? You, your family, your team, or others? Or you did find those things that were in your control and you made the most out of that. You invested your heart, your time, your sweat, your tears, and energy into there. And practically speaking, when it comes to resilience, you can imagine that means being able to protect a sense of positivity, or at least not make things seem worse than they actually are. This means that you are in tune with what gives you energy and what not, so that you can play with that throughout the day, the week, the month, the year, because it's going to be a very long marathon maybe, and you don't know when it's going to finish. When it comes to resiliency, it's about the sense that there's someone in the world who cares about your well-being, Or at least, how can you be that person for others? How do you empathize with others? How do you listen to the emotional message? How do you have those deeper conversations around that? How do you provide a sense of meaning? And all these things together, from my experience, they add up. And then you could say you have a good chance at being resilient, or even better. Yeah.
It does seem like there's this other factor of your interconnectedness with other people that sort of give us when we talk about like the sense of control and optimism, it almost feels like, so a great example would be a friend of mine who is notoriously upbeat and optimistic. And I was chatting with him about his worldview and his perspective. And he said, well, at a young age, we would go to the hospital to volunteer. And I remember one of the wards that I would end up in would often be the burn unit. Oh. And so seeing some of just the agonizing pain that some people were in was a bit of a contrast to, okay, the things that I feel like are really bad, they feel bad, but in perspective of what's happening in the world in terms of just overall suffering, this is something that I shouldn't necessarily give more weight to than it needs to have. And not to diminish anyone's personal struggle, but it does seem like the more we connect with other people, the more we're able to appreciate the things that are going well in our life, the things that we do have. Another example that I would think of that if I could share with you is whenever I started my business, I was really down on myself, feeling like, man, this business isn't going anywhere. I don't know if I'm really making anything happening with this. And I had a friend of mine who is here from China, and we were talking about just his life and what he'd been working on. And at this time, I remember my backyard, it had been raining for like days. It was flooded. It just wasn't very well kept. And I was kind of embarrassed about it. But this was a time in my life that I was also thinking, like, what do I even have? Like, what should I even, be optimistic about? Well, we went to my back porch to sit outside, and he looked over my backyard, which was muddied and ugly and, flooded. And he said, wow, I have worked my whole life to have this. And it's a typical American backyard. It wasn't, anything impressive. But him saying that was a triggering of a perspective of, wow, I've really taken for granted some of the things that I should be grateful for, rather than constantly pessimistic about. So I'm not even sure what the question is out of that, but it does seem like your ability to connect with other people is important in this conversation of being more resilient.
It's connecting with other people, if you're lucky, in the sense that you're exposed to real life situations that reset your perspective. The intention of the book was also to give you the freedom to play with these kinds of thinking all by yourself. And if you find it important to cultivate a sense of gratitude and positivity for what you do have, well, how do you do that so that it feels genuine, not not with a sense of guilt, like, oh, I should be more grateful with my life? What are exercises that you can do to realize that what you have is not a given, how things could have been otherwise, without diminishing any of the difficulties that exist, only if you want to. And the idea here is, as a leader, it's not about moralizing and saying, you should be grateful in life because there's always someone in the world and so forth. It's very much realizing, okay, this week is going to be a tough week. Maybe gratitude can help me to pull through better than I otherwise would have. And I choose to cultivate and practice this throughout this week for myself, for my teams, for my family, for my community, because I want to be more resilient and be there for others in times of need. And it's a sense of choice because I want to, not because I have to. And that's it. You can do the same for meaning. You can say, well, it's difficult maybe sometimes to even feel that sense of gratitude. You cannot force yourself all the time, of course. So you can say, well, at least I want to make sure that which I do, I sense that I'm contributing to something larger than myself. As the philosopher Nietzsche would say, those who have a why can bear almost any how. So in this case, this report I'm writing, in this case, this neighbor that I'm helping, in this case, this conversation that doesn't seem to be ending on the phone, how am I helping someone? What am I contributing to? And how do I make sure I don't lose sight of that? Who am I doing this for? And that sense of meaning might help me and my teams pull through better than we otherwise would have. And this is freedom of choice, freedom of how to think, freedom of making sure that you find the right angle at any given moment of time. So you always feel empowered. That I sincerely hope that the reader takes away from it. It's not about how what you should do, but what you could do. And then you decide what you want to do.
Kayvan, some of the things that you've been talking about today are such deep concepts, and yet they make so much sense. Like they have such an inherent practicability to them. Tell me more about yourself. I mean, when people sit down with you, do they just walk away thinking like, wow, I have a new outlook on my life? I mean, what does it look like when people are connecting with you and conversing with you? And I mean, I can't imagine you have these, I can only imagine that you have these really incredible conversations for people who are willing to listen. What drives you in all of this?
What drives me? That's such a nice. You have all these good questions. I noticed in your podcast.
I try to be a good host so that people will come back.
I personally, through a lot of journeys in my life, from startups or work or immigration, having seen war firsthand, I've noticed so many moments in life that I felt that. If only we could help each other pull through a bit better. And these challenging times are not going to end. If you are a young leader today, who knows what 10 years from now will bring us, 20 years, 30 years. It's an illusion to think that after this pandemic, things will turn out practically easy and simple. So what drives me is being prepared for what's there to come. And having the peace of mind that no matter what life brings our way, maybe not only individually, but collectively, we know how to handle that. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. 2,000 years ago, people were thinking about these topics. And I hope when people have a conversation with me, we feel, both of us, that we learned something from each other, a way of looking at a situation, a different perspective that might be relevant today, might be relevant in the future, and a sense of that you can say it was refreshing. Mm-hmm. It was interesting.
I mean, I feel refreshed. I'm thinking about just my life now and just my perspective. But is this perspective that you're talking about? Is this the answer? Is this the counter argument against pessimism today? Because I know many young people, they're looking at the world right now and they're feeling either hopeless or incredibly pessimistic. They're looking at rampant climate change. They're looking at wealth inequality. They're looking at political polarization, where they're seeing friends and family, and maybe even themselves, who are really being played into identity politics and which side are you on? And I don't know what it's like in Amsterdam, but in the States, it's incredibly volatile, incredibly chaotic. To even have a conversation on, your political ideologies. So, and not to mention all of that, we just came out of or hopefully are coming out of a worldwide pandemic that has affected literally every single person you can think of has been affected in some way. What's the answer to this pessimism? What's the answer to this hopelessness?
So the pessimism and hopelessness that you mentioned, it's very understandable. And personally, I can say for myself that it's very sad in the sense that your youth, when you talk about young leaders, it's a time for idealism. It's time for envisioning good things. It's a time for having that energy that maybe more senior people lack, and bringing that in. And you could also argue that many people, a little too early, feel very disappointed in how things are and how things are working. And that's a big risk. It's a big risk that people say, I give up. It's too complicated. It's too much. Who am I to fix or change all of this. I don't even know what the solution is, let alone what my part in all of that could be. Now, the book is not intended to solve, let's say, pessimism or hopelessness, because that's a different conversation. I don't know, who are we to say, you shouldn't be pessimistic, you shouldn't be hopeless. But if somebody says, I don't want to be pessimistic, I don't want to be hopeless, this is a phase of my life that I actually want to create instead of only witness what I don't like, then the book says, well, these are ways to feel empowered. This is, there are always things within your control, and within that community, within your family, within your household, within your team, with this department of your organization, these are the differences that you can make already today. And if you're up for that, great, let's talk. If you want to feel that this may be not for you, that's also fine, right? There's no inherent thing you should do again, but it's a big invitation if you want to.
I love that perspective of, even if it seems like things are falling apart in the macro, being incredibly mindful of the things in the micro that you can control, and the people you can impact, and the responsibility that you can embrace if you so choose. So, Kayvan, we're unfortunately out of time today. This has been such an interesting conversation. I've loved it. And absolutely, I want to invite you. You need to come back on the show again in the future. This has just been such a delightful conversation.
Thanks a lot. It will be a great pleasure. Time flies with you.
What, for people who are listening, who are thinking, okay, I need to connect with Kayvan. I want to learn more about him. I want to follow maybe some of his content. Maybe for businesses who are listening, who are thinking, okay, maybe I would even want to work with Kayvan. What does that look like? So
the easiest way would be to connect on LinkedIn. And you can, just type in my name, Kayvan Kian, or I think it's LinkedIn/in/Kayvan. But any question that you have as a listener, feel free to just send a message. And many of those questions hopefully can be answered already by the book. Since the pandemic, it's on maximum discount. We couldn't give it away for free on Amazon, but it's for, I think, hopefully there are no financial barriers there. And we can always have a conversation to see how that could look like, how we can work together. If you're interested in articles around this topic, I publish almost once a month something new around this. This week, I handed in the manuscript of book number 2 around better decisions under uncertainty. What does it mean to be more wise, or at least attempt to be more wise? So all those things that are hopefully available for the listeners when they like.
I love that. Well, Kayvan, like I said, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show today, and I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you again, Blake, for the invitation.
Hey, for our listeners, I'm going to put the link to 2 things. I'm going to put Kayvan's LinkedIn profile down in the episode description below if you want to connect with him. I'm also going to put a link to the book, What is Water? How Young Leaders Can Thrive in an Uncertain World. The link to the Amazon purchase link will be down in the episode description below. It's available on Kindle, hardcover, paperback, and also on Audible if you want to use one of your monthly credits on that book. And hey, if you email me, I would be happy to buy you a copy. So send me an email, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com, and I will send 1 copy your way. Hey, if you've been listening to the podcast and you enjoy the podcast, what the heck are you waiting on? Click that subscribe button, click that follow button so you can keep getting good advice wherever you are. And hey, don't forget, if you enjoy the podcast and you maybe even want to support the podcast, you can go to our Patreon. It's at patreon.com/goodadvice, where you can support the podcast. You can even advertise your business in the introduction of the podcast. Again, that's at patreon.com/goodadvice. As always, we appreciate you listening, and we'll catch you later. See ya.